This is Hunt Nebraska, the official podcast for insight into Nebraska's hunting and shooting sports community. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, our space for sharing stories, information, tips, and techniques. Now, Hunt Nebraska.
And a big welcome back to the Hunt Nebraska cabin, folks. We appreciate you taking us along for the ride or into the office, into your home, wherever you might be listening to us. We really do appreciate that. Or watching us on YouTube. We do have kind of a faithful group of folks that actually watches us on YouTube. Now, I'm not sure what they're getting out of it, but we are a visual species, so we'll go with that. Jeff Rollinson there on the corner in the maroon. We've got Hunter behind mission control here, pushing the buttons, all that type of stuff. And, folks, full disclosure, we actually recorded this once. We actually got this recorded once, and something happened with the system or when I was transferring the audio over. So we're doing this a second time. But I think this is a conversation we can recreate. Wasn't anything on your fault, Hunter, by no means. But we've got some bugs worked out, so we'll try this again. Over here, our friendly National Wild Turkey Federation rep, we've got Michael Addison in-house. Me, I'm just Hershy. We've got a couple of these to put down today, folks, so we're going to kind of jump right into it. It is hunting season. It's time to buy permits. It's time to be out there doing your field work. I know as we record this, it's triple digits out there, so not a lot of folks probably outside doing it unless they're getting up really early and knocking it out before it gets much hotter. It starts out hot already, though. Have you guys noticed that?
You walk outside and you feel like you've walked into a pot of soup on the stove.
and the scary thing is knowing that it's only going to get warmer as the day goes by and through. And whew, I can't wait for it. We got a little little sneak peek at fall a few weeks ago, whenever that was. And boy, loved that to death. And now we're kind of paying for it. But it'll come. It will come. So today, what we're going to do is, you can see, if you're watching us online or if you're just listening to us, I'll shake the guides. We are going through some of the confusing regulations. That's what we're calling it, but to be honest with you, folks, these are ones that just cause some questions. Sometimes we've got to change things, tweak things, which can cause a little bit of, head scratching for those that have been in the sport of hunting for many years. Or if you're brand new to it, some things in terminology, it's like hunters use their own words, right? I mean, we've got our own vocabulary. It's almost like we need a vocab list, Hunter, in hunter education, so we can tell people what bag limit is and what a possession limit is. Or, my favorite one, inside corner, outside corner. That's become popular in the deer hunting world. Just like, well, it's a corner, right? What makes it inside, outside? What perspective is it? We've got it all, Jeff, you remember.
I do.
When we put the question out there, we started doing some things in an old podcast format and video about defining some words, and we got some non-hunters to write down some issues or terms that they've heard hunters use that they have never figured out what it was. And it was pretty revealing, folks. I mean, even when they said, hey, what's the difference between a drake and a regular duck? I mean, is that special? Rut. I keep hearing about that. Well, I got stuck once and I was told that I, was in a rut, that type of thing. What does a rut mean? So it was kind of revealing. We've got our own vocab. We're not going to get into that here, but sometimes that does help. Even when we put together regulations and rules and all that type of stuff and orders, sometimes we have our own language. So we're here to help cut through the clutter, help avoid confusion, and answer some of those common questions that we always get to hear quite a bit. Now, Hunter, you just wrapped up a Master Hunter Ed instructor meeting.
Yep.
And you actually had one of our conservation officers in attendance.
Yeah, and he talked about, I don't know if it's necessarily confusing regulations, but he talks about the common violations, which obviously your regulations and laws go hand in hand with writing a citation if necessary, or educating in some instances too. So it's kind of interesting to hear his insight onto some of those common ones that he sees out in the field.
Yeah, and sometimes that can be a little confusion. Well, I heard something my buddy say this, and it ends up not being right.
Right.
It can also be one of those things that I'm sure our conservation officers see people actually outright breaking the law that they even know about, or the regulation. But let's jump into it. Talking about hunter education, that's gotten, we've got more opportunities, more options nowadays in hunter education. And I think that sometimes, especially for folks coming to Nebraska that want to come archery hunting for deer, for example, which opens September 1st, right around the corner, they see this requirement that says bow hunter education required. And they say, well, my hunter ed class in fill in the blank state, we talked a lot about guns, a lot about firearms, and we had some guy come in and talk for 30 minutes on bow hunting. Does that count?
Yes and no. So that's the part in Nebraska is, if you we accept standard hunter education from all 50 states, Canada, Mexico, some other countries as well, but that's your firearm hunter ed that we call it here. On the bow hunter side of things, if you took a class that included a small portion of it, but you didn't get a bow hunter ed card or certificate, we don't accept it. But if it's a standalone class where you get that certificate that says bow hunter education, archery education, the state of Nebraska accepts that as that proof for hunting big game with archery equipment.
Is there any states left in the U.S. of A. that doesn't have some form of hunter education requirement?
I don't think so. I think all 50 have some sort, whether it's age requirement or most of them are based off your age, but there's other exemptions in some states like military. Other types of exemptions, law enforcement officers too.
And the one interesting thing is how many states actually have a specific bow hunter education requirement. I'm not asking perhaps for a specific number, but it's probably in the minority.
About 1 in 5 states. I think there's 11 states that have a bow hunter education requirement, but they all vary. Nebraska is specific to an age range. You have to, between 12 and 29. Hunting deer, antelope, elk, or bighorn sheep. So that's Nebraska's. Other states have varying levels of bow hunter ed requirements depending on the state.
And I think it's one of those things that most states have, might not be mandatory, folks, but it might be one of those things that voluntary. You can go in and take bow hunter education. I've lived in one of those states and taught that course for those that wanted that extra learning opportunity or to fulfill requirements for out-of-state or hunters from that state going out of state to hunt. And that's one of those things that most people will probably get on the phones like, our state doesn't offer it. And most likely they do. It's just not as known about, perhaps not as available just because it's more voluntary than
and
required.
We get calls every, especially as we approach. I've been getting calls all August on folks asking these same questions. What do I need bow hunter ed? I'm hunting deer this age. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Okay, what are my options? And for the most part, those folks coming out of state are over the age of 16, so their easiest option is probably the online bow hunter education course that the state of Nebraska offers. Otherwise, if their state offers a bow hunter education course in person, or we have in-person options here for them too. So
there you go. And again, that's for those here in Nebraska hunting. What are the species? Deer, elk, bighorn, pronghorn.
Yep.
Or antelope is what we like to call them.
Those 4 need bow hunter ed.
There you go. And our spring turkey hunters, Jeff, don't, if they're coming with archery tackle.
So. No, that was something that was removed from the requirements years ago, and so for archery hunting for turkey, it's not required.
In firearm, 12 to 29 as well have to carry proof that they've completed a firearm hunter education course, which a lot of states just call hunter education. Like you said, we're reciprocal. We'll accept theirs as long as they meet those standards, and I don't know of any that don't. But then you add something, and make sure I get this right because it's a long title. All right? Make sure I get a Hunter Education Exemption Certificate.
I missed a word. Apprentice Hunter Education Exemption Certificate.
Oh, I knew it. Apprentice Hunter Education Exemption Certificate.
Right there. Yeah.
Could we have made it? I think we need to add another word. After it celebrates its 10th year, we need to add another word in there.
And this was one of those things that came about when we had so much discussion. And gosh, I want to say we're in that 10, 12, 15-year mark somewhere in there, probably 15 years now, where we had so much discussion that hunter education was some thought of it as a barrier. Now, it was at that twilight for different states, Fish and Wildlife states, agencies that were saying, hey, look, hunter education is not a barrier, but, there's only one way to take it, and it's not convenient or workable for everybody. It was a little bit of a barrier for some. I think today's states have online, in-person, hybrid type classes, not a barrier at all anymore. And so, but this was at that time when, well, gee whiz, we want to make sure that people who just didn't have time to take hunter education would have the opportunity to hunt without making that 2-week, 4-day commitment or whatever the case may be. And so we came out with that apprentice exemption certificate.
Yeah, and I think
Get all those words.
Apprentice hunter
education
certificate.
exemption.
Exemption certificate.
Golly. Apprentice hunter education exemption. Taj Mahal certificate.
Folks, one of these days,
Extraordinaire.
I just
we
call
will
it
get it
the-
right.
The exemption.
No, we
Maybe
won't.
not today.
It's more than 3 big words. We're not getting it right. But
And one of the confusing things is, I think for some folks, is where they find it. Because they probably call our own hunter ed coordinator for the entire state, who happens to be Hunter Nikolai right here. Where do I get it? How do I do it? What do I do? Because it's not actually something you go through the hunter education page to track down. It's through our permit system.
Yeah, and there's some information on our Hunter Ed page on how to get it, but yeah, you can purchase that exemption certificate, as I like to call it, and shorten it up a little bit. You can purchase it just like you purchase a permit, a stamp on our permit system. So it's pretty straightforward. The biggest thing is make sure, if you're mom or dad purchasing for your son or daughter, make sure you're on their permit profile to purchase that exemption. And I don't know that we've described. I mean, I think it kind of is self-explanatory, but what is the exemption certificate? And I think that's Jeff kind of touched on it, but it exempts those who are in between the ages of 12 and 29 from a hunter ed or bow hunter ed requirement for the remainder of that year. So the biggest 2 reasons we see folks doing that are, like Jeff said, they didn't get into a class or couldn't get into a class, conflict with their local class that year. And still want to get out and hunt, or they just want to try hunting and don't want to take that course until they at least give it a try before they commit to taking a full hunter education course.
Well, it's one of those things
That's
that
the commitment.
it's amazing. Here in Nebraska, as soon as the day you turn 12, boom, you need to have that hunter education. And if you've got a fall birthday or something like that, it's easy to kind of forget about that. Just like he's been hunting or she's been hunting for several years now, and now all of a sudden this comes in, and I completely forgot that's right, because you can get certified in hunter ed at 11. We give you a whole extra year to kind of knock it out. But sometimes life gets busy and we forget about it.
Well, how
Keeps
uninviting
getting
is
pushed
that?
back.
If you think about it and say, "Why don't you come hunting? You want to go hunting? Let's go hunting." Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, you got to go through a 4-week program before you can go hunting with us. That's too bad, Hunter.
Yep.
And the opportunity is gone, right? But if you're going to be hunting with me and I'm an experienced hunter, that made sense to say, "Hey, look, you'll get hunter education." Or on the flip side, some friends asked me to go hunting, but I don't know that I want to commit 4 weeks of. I don't know that I don't know if I'm there yet, but I want to try it one time.
Yep.
And so, that's why it was started. And I think Nebraska has navigated some really cool laws over the years to get hunters out in the field.
One of the things we have to probably hit on with this exemption certificate as well, Hunter, is it's not just something you go buy and then you go hunting. You still need to have that regular hunt permit, habitat stamp if you're required, that type of stuff. If you're going to waterfowl hunting, we'll get into that here in just a little bit, all the things you need. This is in addition to that, but it also has some accompaniment requirements.
Yep. So if you have that exemption, you have to be accompanied by an adult, 19 years or older, and accompanied within sight and sound at all times while you're hunting. And that adult has to be licensed or have hunter education if they're between that 19 and 29 requirement too. So basically you need to be with a legal adult hunter at the time while you're hunting.
There you go. Just popped in my head. 19 years of age is the minimum for that one. I'm guessing we've had some younger siblings accompany their older siblings out on some hunts under this. It seems interesting to me, but yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say about the Apprentice Hunter Education Exemption Certificate? Boom!
Hey,
Nailed it.
He got it.
I read it
He
right
was
off.
reading it.
Read it right
that
off.
didn't count.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I think it could be a good option for you depending on your situation. I think it's the best to just be aware of it. You buy it just like you buy a permit if you're looking for it too. But obviously, you'll still at some point need that hunter education because it's valid for the rest of the calendar year, and then you can renew it for one more year.
There you go.
Well, not to mention, there's just a lot of education that goes with taking a hunter education.
Oh, a lot of
class.
neat
Every hunter should take a hunter
How
education
many of us
class.
have taught one of those hunter ed classes, and we've had the parents who decide, oh, well, I've been here, I'm going to be here for the whole class. Why not get signed up for it, knock it out in case I want to go out state, or hey, I might as well see how I do. And they come up to you after the class and say, man, I learned quite a bit here. It's just about every class that happens when you have an adult taking it. Just like this was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. All right, so that's the exemption certificate, and if you got more questions about that, folks, again, you can, like you said, I guess go to a hunter education page, and it explains it a little bit more. HuntSafeNebraska.org is one way to get there. What are some other things that our conservation officer mentioned as common issues he sees there in the field?
The big one, one of the big ones he was talking about was the blaze or hunter orange requirements during the November firearm deer season.
You hit on this one quite a bit,
and
Jeff. Yeah,
hunters, they're wearing the vest, but they don't have the hat on, and they're missing. They've got the head and chest covered, or the chest and back covered, but not the head covered, and that's one that our 400 square inch requirement requires head, chest, and back. So
and that's why this one frustrates me. Is this one's not complicated.
Right.
This is in doubt. If you're in doubt, make sure your chest and back and head are covered. I mean, it's pretty simple. Don't worry about the 400. Even if you have to be in doubt, head, back, and chest. Head, back, and chest, you're covered 400 square inches and then some. But people just, and we've been there, right? You got that stocking cap, and it's 65 degrees out, so you take that stocking because it's hot. Always tell people wear a stocking cap and a baseball cap. Make sure you bring both to the stand with you, because you might get into that stand and be blazing hot. Put the baseball cap on, and then when it gets a little chillier out, switch over to the stocking cap, both in blaze orange, and you're set, because you're going to have that vest on.
And I think people get nervous. 400 square inches, man, that sounds like a lot, but it really isn't.
No, it's not.
It's not that big of a deal as long as you've got orange, like you said, on those 3 spots. I guarantee you're going to be meeting that requirement and probably going well over.
Yeah. You're going to go well over with just a vest and a hat. And here's a tip. That vest goes outside of your coat, not inside your coat and parka and sweatshirt and all that.
Yeah, I was wearing it underneath your heavy coat. Yeah.
And I know guys that have blaze orange parkas, blaze orange sweatshirts, all that. That's great too. Blaze orange.
Yep. And I don't understand folks that go deer hunting without a hat. I'm not one of those. There are people.
I have a hard time going anywhere without a hat, especially when it's hot out. But in the cold, I put a warm weather hat on.
Thank goodness you're wearing one here.
I think I almost could. I think my hair just about meets that blaze orange requirement. So I think I maybe could get away with it.
Close.
You're
just a hue off.
Maybe just dye it a little brighter.
Yeah. But I mean, when it's cold out, I just feel like the heat's just escaping like crazy out of my head or my mouth because I'm talking.
Hunter, maybe we're missing an opportunity here with all the hair dyes and things out there, and folks looking for different colors in their own natural hair. Maybe there is a blaze orange, hunter orange that meets that requirement that you could sell, October, November, I think and make some money. I do know some people that they do not like hats. They don't like stocking caps. They don't like ball caps. They'll wear a scarf or something around their ears. That counts as the head. Get that. Make sure that's orange. But there's no reason nowadays with all the orange available not to just be oranged up that entire time you need it.
Yep.
So.
And what does that look like to a deer, Hershey, when you got that blaze orange on? Does this look
very stylish?
Yeah, very stylish.
Very
cool.
Deer don't want to be shot by somebody that's not
very hip,
stylish,
very hip.
but no, it's one of those cool things. And for our older listeners, just like the old dichromatic screens we used to have on our computers before the full color stuff, they can see in certain hues. Those deer can, but they're made more for seeing in low light conditions than they are bright sunlight. So they don't see that blaze or hunter orange the same way that we do. It sticks out as unnatural to us. To them, it looks kind of like a different shade of gray, and it blends in. And that's why some of our old home states like Wisconsin, they've messed around with hunter pink as well. It might blend in even better, and some people see that color even more. We have not gone that route here in the state of Nebraska. It is designated. I think that there's even a nanometer or wavelength that our actual was that in statute?
I think it is actually. Yeah, there's a wavelength of orange that you have to have it in between. Yeah, and I think if you go by hunter orange or blaze orange, you're within that.
Yeah, you're
likely within that.
One thing, and not to add any more to this, but hey, it's always a good idea to you can renew that, because sometimes you wear the same thing after a decade or two, or you throw it in the back window or in the dashboard and let the sun beat down on it. While it will not be that same color for forever. It will fade, and that's one thing I know some of our conservation officers talk about. Is there's some education they do each deer season, because the hunter orange is no longer hunter orange. It's just kind of a faded sherbet color. So, but all right. So we're going to go through this a little bit more, some things that add some confusion. And Jeff, I know you're making notes over there.
Oh,
this is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
This
there's
is
all
pretty good. One thing I do want to start out with, I think one of the things that we hear a lot of confusion about, mainly because I think there's some waterfowl hunters here, duck and goose, and dove season's not too far away, but all the things I need to go duck hunting.
That was my top of my list. You took the one right off the top of my list, and it's probably the one that's most frustrating to me and the friends and family that I hunt with, because it's not just that you got to remember all those things, right? But it's also you got to go find those things, right? And I think with today's technology, we're getting toward a day where that's. In fact, I know our team is working on that. And let me preface this by saying, our hunt guides and fishing guides and all that. There's a team of folks who review these. It goes through some scrutiny, and they do a fantastic job. There's no question about it. The only thing is these things are big. There's a lot going on. So it's just, anybody has a different angle or a different eye can always come up with something. Oh, well, why do we do this? Why do we do that? But there's a lot of passion, a lot of thought by this team that goes through these. And I want to shout out to them because, some of them are kind of the unsung heroes, and they do a good job. They do a really good job of this. As do the teams that put together our regs.
These guides are just kind of a condensed version of everything,
guide.
trying to hit the highlights, the bullet points, and even then, it's amazing all the ground that you have to cover.
Yes. These guides, and that's a good point, Hershey. Our statute book, our regs book, you're talking volumes thick. And these things here condense a lot of that down. And so it's not always straightforward as to what goes in here and how it needs to be worded, and try to make it worded something that's not the legal jargon, because not everybody likes to read that. So there's a lot of work there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky to figure out exactly the question or what one out of 180,000 individuals that take part in hunting each year here in the state of Nebraska are going to go to this specific guide to find that specific answer. It's kind of hard. So we hit the most common.
That's right. And what words are they looking for? You can't predict that hardly, And so it's not an easy thing to put together. So hats off to our team that does that. But you can go through it and you go, man, that's back to waterfowl. How did these things evolve? That's the key. They evolve. It isn't like at the very first day of our very first waterfowl season, there's going to have to be at least 4 things you got to get. Let's make it. Can we all agree on 4? Okay. And what are those going to be now? That's not how it happened. Okay. So it evolved, and so you look at waterfowl and you think, okay, what do I have to have? Okay, what hunting license? Check. Habitat stamp, check. Now we got all, because there's small game, all that done. You're not done yet. You're not halfway done. You got to have a duck stamp.
State duck stamp.
Whoa, not there yet. We're okay. State duck stamp, check. Okay, I bought my duck stamp, right? Well, you bought one of 2 duck stamps. I'm sorry, what?
2.
No, you have to have a federal duck stamp too. Okay, check. All right, I got my hunting license, my habitat stamp, my state duck stamp, my federal duck stamp. Good to go.
Nope.
So close.
So close.
Don't forget your HIP registration.
That's probably the one that gets forgotten about the most.
It's easy to forget, and it's so easy to get. And so, and again, hats off. The team's made it so easy to get some of these things. But honestly, that's just a lot of stuff to remember. And so if I had one complaint, it's and like I said, I know we're looking ahead. We're working on this, but make it so easy so you can go to, I want to hunt ducks. Click. Here's all the things populated online. All you got to do is hit go pay. And it gives me everything I need. And if I already got it gives me the 3 things I need. If I already got those, it gives me the 2 things I need. And so the team's already thinking of that and working on that. But we're not there yet. And I thought we would be by now, as a young hunter.
Getting closer.
Yeah. But I also thought we'd have Jetson cars where we'd be hovercraft cars like the Jetsons. And so I'm a little disappointed in technology. You got to understand that.
Well, hey, I just happened to catch a little bit of Back to the Future Part 2. When they go into the future in 2015 and seeing all the things that we're already missing out on. Yeah. See, folks, you got to check that out. Their idea back in the 1980s or early 90s of what 2015 was going to look like, way off. Way off. The Cubs did win the World Series, though, which is kind of interesting.
No, in
we've
2015
got a new
they
permit
didn't.
system,
But-
and our permits team is working hard to get some of these things put together.
One
for
thing
us.
I got to toss out there, too, is that HIP number, that Harvest Information Program number. Folks, if you haven't done it yet and you've done it in the past, it's in a little bit different spot. It is on the permit system now. It's not a separate page. You're going to go in just like you're buying a regular permit. And I do believe, gentlemen, it's under the stamp certificates and that thing. There you click on that, and then it's got questions for you.
Is it there or is it under the I think it might be under the small game or hunt permit section.
All right, now we're going to look this up as we go.
We need to validate that. Huh?
we got. I have not bought I have not got my HIP number. The HIP number is free. I mean, that's the other thing.
It's free. You go online. You can go on outdoornebraska.gov. You can call it in, but it takes about all of 2 minutes at the most, and it's free. And it's kind of an important deal because of all the things we do to help. Of course, all hunting is a tool for wildlife conservation, wildlife management. So hunters all realize that we're a tool to help with the cause. And so most, if not all, hunters are generally whatever you guys need me to do, let me do. I want to help. I want to be additive. And HIP is one of those things that really helps in understanding harvests and who's harvesting what, and it basically puts you in a category when you go online and I hunted this many days and this many critters and harvested this many. Put you in an avidity type category so that a survey later can come out and help us better understand different levels of avidity and harvest success, and it gives us quite a bit of information on harvest and population.
It's not where I said it was.
Nope, it's under the when you're on our permit website, purchasing permits under the hunt or small game permit section.
Small game permit section. See, there you go. I just learned something new.
I think your first time looking for it, you'll have to go and find it. But I think the other thing with the HIP registration is, we get a decent amount of non-resident hunters coming into Nebraska. They register for HIP in one state. They come into Nebraska, they still got to register for HIP here. So that's one more added layer that. I already got my HIP. Well, wait, hold on just one second.
If you understand what it's for, you realize that data doesn't transfer over, right?
Yep,
so we got to have new data
so
for the state.
I'm going to get mine right now. I'm going to proceed to check out. I had to put it in my cart. And that costs
you do that on your own time, Hershey. This is work time.
Well, no, I'm working through this because I'm learning here.
Use your work time to buy your permits.
I'm learning here.
Man, oh man!
But then
no
it gets
better way to learn and educate.
The one thing is to get to those
practice it yourself. Yeah.
To get to those questions that you're asked, if you're familiar with them, did you hunt ducks last year, geese last year, how many days, doves, snipe, rail, coot, all that type of stuff. You actually have to kind of get into the cart, and it'll tell you that you've got some more things to do, which also we remind folks that you got two options. If you do say, yes, you're going to duck hunt this year, you got two options. Tier 1, the traditional 6 ducks daily bag limit, along with all the species and gender restrictions. Tier 2, the 3 duck bag limit without those restrictions on it is kind of another thing you're going to have to answer there as well. Now I'm going to toss it in there. So we've started talking about HIP, or the Harvest Information Program number. Dove hunters need that as well. And I do think it's one of those things that this is a term that we use to describe pheasants, quail, they're upland game, right? Doves usually kind of considered, they're not waterfowl. They don't have webbed feet. You don't find them, you find them around small puddles of water. They need to drink something too. But we created a category that sometimes adds a little bit of confusion. And it is webless migratory birds. And that's here in the state of Nebraska. It's pretty much doves and Eurasian collared doves, the exotic. That's one of those things, and I think that adds some confusion to some folks, hunters and non-hunters, that, they might nest in the state of Nebraska. They might live a good chunk of their life in Nebraska, but because they cross state lines, sometimes international borders, they are actually overseen. The management responsibility actually falls to the federal government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior. Now, we've got waterfowl biologists, obviously, but that's to help work with habitat and work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to work within their frameworks and our seasons. Our season dates, we've got a little bit to tweak, but it has to be within their framework, and that's why September 1st is the earliest time we can open up dove season here in the state of Nebraska or in the U.S. because of those international bird treaties. So, but you need a HIP number for a dove, right?
Yep, you need a HIP number.
But you don't need a duck stamp.
But you don't need a
federal or
stamp.
state.
Nope.
But you do need that HIP. And what's the other one that causes some confusion out there in the dove fields?
Well,
shotgun plug.
Shotgun plugs.
You gotta remember, migratory game birds. All migratory game birds, you have to have a plug shotgun. So if you hear any of us in person say webless migratory birds, we're pretty much talking about doves here in the state of Nebraska. And if you require HIP for it, you're required to have a plug shotgun.
I mean, we got other snipe, rail, woodcock, crows in there too, just not as commonly hunted as doves. And thank goodness we've got to plug our shotguns to only have 3 shells, because I mean it's just You'd miss them a fourth and fifth.
Oh,
time
I
if
was
you
going to
didn't.
say, you'd go through so many shells. It wouldn't help you in the field. I mean, you wouldn't
They're
hit any more
saving us
birds,
from
but-
ourselves and the embarrassment of our wonderful wing shooting.
And I think every hunter knows the setbacks of 4 or 5 shells and whatnot. So I don't think there's too many hunters I've ever talked to that have any concerns or qualms with that. That's fine. After 3 shots, you're good. That's on you. That's not on us. That's on you.
I think
I like how Jeff pointed at me for that.
the plugged gun is one that when I got into waterfowl hunting was not a foreign concept to me, but it's one that it takes more planning and thinking about than some of the other rules and regulations. Well, it's one of those that you could forget very easily because it's internal of your shotgun for one thing. You're not looking at it every day and just.
And cattails are not a great substitute for making that plug shotgun. It'll plug it, but not the right way.
Instructors, which is probably in this room here, but we're hunter ed instructors. How many times a year, if you're teaching a class, you taking the plug in and out of your gun, in and out of your gun? Hunter ed instructors, we got to remember to put the plug back in our gun after a hunter ed class because it's pretty easy to forget. So always test.
And I will say it's made it easier when you go buy a new shotgun nowadays. The plug is almost always installed. Yep. And I found with my upland bird hunting, which I do a decent amount of, if I'm going to miss it 3 times, I'll probably miss it that 4th time. There's rare the opportunity where I run my shotgun dry and then another bird pops up that on an empty. And nowadays they're just like, oh shucks,
just not much of a factor.
It really isn't. But I will say that one of the first times my son ever joined us on a duck hunt, it was an early teal season. He was so proud of it. He got a duck or 2 and he called it good, which was really kind of neat. One of our federal officers, one of our federal game wardens, drove up later on as we were sitting around the tailgate reliving the morning hunt. My whole family was there, all 4 of us. My brother and his ally were there, so we were just kind of reliving just a beautiful September day. And the warden came up, and it was time he wanted to check us. He was chatting already, but my son was so proud of the ducks he shot. He pointed those out, and they're so proud of the gun he used to use it to get those 2 ducks. He pulled it out and showed it to the game warden. And of course the game warden's going to check it at that point. And I had no reason to doubt that I took the plug out or left it in. I'm 90% sure, but I sweated that 10%. It's like
for 30 seconds you were like,
crap. Because that gun hadn't been used except for breaking blue rock for probably 15, 20 years up to that. And this was the first day it was used on something other than a turkey. And it just kind of like, I never took it out. I never took it out. I never took it out.
It's got to be plugged for the turkey.
What if I took it out?
It's the same thing with
the instance of hey, you want to go dove hunting? Oh yeah, you got a gun I can borrow? Oh yeah, here's my old trusty 870.
Again,
make sure it's your responsibility.
Right.
But there's a lot of different situations that can take place before you get to the field, and we all know that happens as hunters.
And that's another frustration sometimes because I invite a friend from work, for example, to go waterfowl hunting or dove hunting. That's very common. Okay, they don't know diddly squat about it. They're just relying on me. They have not gone through the guidebook, or they don't even know it exists probably. Yeah, and if you're relying on that person, boy, you're putting a lot of faith into that one person. So you got to make sure you're steering people correct. But if you're mentoring somebody, you certainly got to make sure that they are following the rules that you have to follow.
There you go. What else you guys got?
I don't want to monopolize, guys. I got lists, but I don't want to monopolize.
So as an aside here, I've got one for after this one. Probably one of the
after
most
we're done recording.
Common ones of this, but when our previous bear hunting, we were talking about my upcoming bear hunt.
Oh yeah,
we met the bear guide this past weekend, and
not in Nebraska. I want to be clear on that.
Asked a lot of questions. Yeah, not in Nebraska. Talked to him, ran bait. Checked cameras. Saw all the properties we're going to be hunting, and the way that they identify a shootable bear. So all your bait has to be covered, so it's not accessible by other wildlife. Something heavy enough. Sometimes they'll use hollowed out logs. Sometimes they'll just use big cuts of wood. To cover that bait, dig a hole, cover the bait. Only the bear can move that to get to it. But the way they do it is they cut those logs that they cover the bait with to about the length of a shooter bear, as they say, so that when that bear is on that bait pile, if it's the length of that, you've got a mark there to see that it's at least 42 inches or the minimum
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought that up because, folks, we talked about it. If you didn't hear, obviously hunters going out of state to hunt some black bear, and they have a size minimum. It's got to be at least 42 inches from snout
And this is not
to the base of the tail, not the tip of the tail, but the base.
And this is not catch and release.
Well, hard to be, yeah. I guess I could dart and go. But.
And the guide expects them to stretch that bear prior to the shot. So I think, this requires an extra level of knowledge when you get out.
So you've been practicing, been out there. I mean, when we tried it there at the state fairgrounds, you got really close.
I was at 41 inch. I was illegal.
Yeah. But you were also a lot closer to us than you probably were going to be with a bear. I hope.
I think I'm ready. I've read the regs several times now. I've watched videos. We're getting ready, so I'm pretty confident. But they also say that the size of you look at the bear's ears, and that's a good way to tell how big they are. The smaller the ears are, the bigger the bear is because their heads growing and their ears aren't. So if their ears look huge, they're probably a pretty small bear. But if they're smaller, it's a bigger bear. But
shoot the little ear bear.
How do they measure the bear? I mean, is it like one of those flexible like seamstress type?
I don't know. We'd have to get a Wisconsin game warden on the podcast or something to talk about that regulation. But
carefully, they measure carefully.
I bet they're
when they're sleeping. They got to measure them when they're sleeping.
I bet they're going to have fun with you on that. And just the guide up front. All right, I got it up here by the nose. You get back to the tail, and he just slowly walks you back about 8 inches, and now all of a sudden it's by the ear or something like that. It's
only 40 inches.
Yeah.
You'd be sweating bullets.
I'm thankful we don't have to figure out, only antlerless deer, of such length from nose to the back of the head or anything like that. I mean,
we do, 6 inches, minimum antler, 6 inches.
Let me tell you, that causes me some confusion because I've got so many other states in my head about how tall it is, or if it forks, if it's fork on one side or both sides, if it's 6 inches on one or both, or how that all happens. I know. One of the first time I sweated that, I had a doe tag, muzzleloader season, snowy, had a deer come in that was absolutely, I had the binoculars up on him, no antlers. It's like, oh man, this is a big doe, kind of light colored, but got a big neck, and got the scope up on her, and like I said, using muzzleloader at the time. Actually, might have been open sights on that. It might have been before we started allowing magnification, Jeff, on our black powder. I think it was. Pulled the trigger and just beautiful shot. Walk up to it and I could see on top of its head just these nubs. Now they weren't 6 inches, they weren't forked. It met all of it, but at the same time it's just like, whoa.
Yeah.
So knowing what it is and knowing that state, and that's one thing that I do think causes some confusion because it's like this in one state doesn't mean it's like that across the border in another state.
Right. Oh, it's like
words mean things.
It's like we're back in Missouri in the county I hunt in back home, they have an antler point restriction where on one side there has to be at least 4 points on the antler.
And how long do those antlers have to be? I mean, I grew up in an area where it counted as a point if it put a ring on it and it doesn't fall off.
I think in order to count as a point, it has to be 1 inch.
1 inch
from the main beam.
Gotcha.
So.
It's hard to measure them if they're not in the right mood. I'm just telling you right now, it's not easy to do.
Most deer typically don't like it when you try to hop on their back and measure their antlers. And they kind of throw a fit about it.
It's a dilemma.
Obviously, folks, when sportsmen and women are in doubt, they hold off on the trigger and they take a photo. But it is one of those things you got to think about.
That's the case. If in doubt, hold off on the trigger. There's no animal worth violating the game law.
All right, it looks like you're looking at something there, Hunter.
No, I was reading our legal description there. I was thinking back. I think Wisconsin's a 3 inch minimum. So I was thinking back to we do a lot of deer drives, and I'm like, man, sometimes those deer are booking it, and if you were to take a shot at a running deer, you got no chance at identifying that 3 versus 6 versus whatever. So it's.
Again, there's probably a good idea there, right? Yeah. Don't shoot at running deer because you got to make some identifications.
Yeah, and we're pretty fortunate here in the state of Nebraska. Our definition is pretty straightforward, I think. Deer drives do happen here in the state of Nebraska, but they're not as traditional as they are in some other states, especially with the rifle hunters. For some reason, I find it interesting that in the December portion of the archery season here in the state of Nebraska, that deer drives, that's probably where they thrived for a little while. Now, I can only imagine what it's like going, and Hunter, you're probably in the same boat, what a deer drive when you're holding a bow and arrow looks like. Now all of a sudden you got to be able to do it where that deer's probably not running too fast or coming in within 20 yards. I mean, that's woo.
Well, I have done deer drives with bow and arrow before. It's common there in some parts of Wisconsin too, but I think the big thing is a lot of the time when they're, those deer are being driven, they stop, look back at the drivers coming their way, and that's the opportunity, right?
If you're doing it right, yeah.
But,
so you brought up bait, and this is one I do think not necessarily that the regulation causes issue, though it has changed a couple of times in the last decade or so. So you want to stay up on it. But I think that part of the confusion is when you go to a store, a sporting goods store, a department store during certain times of the year, where they're selling all sorts of bags of deer corn and bait and feeders, and they've got all sorts of supplemental junk going on in there that. Baiting laws, they are drastically different state to state. I think we're going to have to do a whole conversation on this because the folks, our neighbors to the south in Kansas, are going through some public meetings about baiting. It's outlawed on public ground it's outlawed, but they're looking at doing something perhaps, or at least opening the conversation up to whether it should be allowed as open as it is on private ground, which makes up 98% of the state. Here in Nebraska, we're not too different. 97% of our ground is privately owned, only 3% in public ownership, and that doesn't mean that 3% is hunted by any means. But our bait law, and this year, folks, it's in the Big Game Guide, page 33. Thanks, Hunter, for pointing that out. I'm just going to read it. It is illegal to hunt any big game animals or turkeys within 200 yards of a baited area. An area is considered baited for 10 days following the complete removal of all bait. The hunter and the animal must be outside of the baited area during the harvest or attempted harvest. Baited area is any location where grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, hay, minerals, including salt, or any other natural food materials, commercial food or commercial products containing food materials or byproducts of such materials that may attract big game or turkey. The use of scents alone, normal environmental conditions, standard farming and ranching practices, forest management, wildlife food plantings, orchard management, or similar land management activities do not constitute a baited area. It is unlawful to create a baited area on land owned or controlled by the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So a lot of things there trying to get pretty specific, and I think that's common in a lot of states in the Bay.
We have changed it over the last several years, and our baiting law is a lot better now, a lot more straightforward than it was 5 years ago.
And I think, like you said earlier, that's what we're trying to do. But even then, we have to be adaptable because things always change. I mean, my goodness, it's just things we can't predict happen, or different techniques or different types of ways to attract animals. Now, it said there, scent alone, not considered a baited area. Some states, like Wisconsin, Hunter, they actually regulate how much of that stuff you can take out there. And some of this is fair chase. Some of it has to do with also the scene vector, some different diseases that when you bring and concentrate deer in a small area, it's just easier for an infected one to spread to healthier critters and whatnot. But that is one that we might have to have a conversation on, because I know they're having a big conversation on it down in the south. Here in Nebraska, Jeff, it was allowed a little bit more than it is now.
So, yeah, in fact, most of us are deer hunters today. A lot of us grew up under the ability to bait deer, and wasn't even bad, and no one batted an eye at it. But that changed when CWD came on, and that was one of the more critical issues for us.
That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
It really was. It gave biologists an idea that, hey, look, if bringing deer together to touch noses and bump noses and whatnot's a bad idea, then the time that they're going to do that the most is likely in the winter months, if people are putting bait out or feed out where they're all congregated in certain areas. And so in that, I understood that. I got that. And so that's when our baiting laws changed. And I think we see that in some other states as well. But it was probably a good idea from that standpoint, because we certainly want to control the spread of diseases like chronic wasting disease. That's not something we really want to mess around with.
We'll have to have a kind of a debate on this. I've been looking into what the surrounding states have, because Kansas is kind of bringing it into the forefront again. I think they've had a couple of public meetings on it. I think they've got a couple more that they're going to talk to them. Where it is part of probably their tradition, part of they see it to some extent as their right to do. Here in Nebraska, like you said, we were a little bit more restrictive on that, maybe considerably more since that that baiting law and hunting over bait is private and public, and public you just can't do it. But I grew up in a spot where in a state you can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's known as probably one of the top places to go shoot big deer.
Yeah.
They're not immune from chronic wasting disease or some of the other things going on out there by any means. But at the same token, it was just, to be called, to be said or make claims that you were baiting deer and that's where you shot them. My goodness.
It was life, right?
It was one of, yeah. You're just not that good.
You wouldn't even show your face in church on Sunday.
It was pretty bad. So we'll have to do another one like that.
You brought up a good point, and that is, some states, some people feel like it's our right to bait. And I want to be clear, it's not. there is hunting is a tool in wildlife management. There's no rights about it. It's a tool for conservation, and like you said earlier, things change. We have to be adaptable. And
it's one of those interesting things, especially in a state where, all right, this is what you can do on public. And this is what you can do on private when it's right. Different. But it's one of those things that, you can try to make, in my opinion anyway, and like I said, we'll have to get into this because I think we could make a whole podcast, folks, on this. And I know our listeners probably feel pretty strongly one way or the other. If it's bad on public, it's probably not much better on private, or if it's not having any problem on private, then it's probably not that bad on public. And to have that dichotomy is kind of interesting. But private land, private rights, all that type of stuff. But when you're talking about a public resource, something that's held by everybody, it's kind of, we've already got rules and regulations on what you can dump into that creek.
That's right. You can't pollute the stream on your property. You can't pollute the air on your property. There's a lot of things that go outside of
it makes it pretty tough on those that are challenged with managing the statewide herd and whatnot. So we'll have to get into it. But I do want to toss it out because if you watch YouTube videos, the TV shows that are oftentimes sponsored by folks that do pretty good making supplemental feed, bait, whatever you want to call it. And then you go down to the local sporting goods store. Well, they wouldn't sell this stuff if it was illegal, right? And you and I, Hunter and Michael, we talked about it. I know that our local Walmart at one time was trying to clearance out this donut-scented bear attractant because they couldn't sell it to anybody in Nebraska. It doesn't mean that, it works. You can buy stuff that you can't use in certain areas or they assume maybe you're going to buy it and go to Wisconsin or go to Minnesota or go out west or something perhaps. But it just because it's sold doesn't make it legal to use. So keep that in mind. I do think that's a confusing thing. We're going to have to put a fork in there. I think we might have to do this again because we've just barely scratched the surface. And I know we're going to get some more questions as we get a little closer to the hunting seasons and it cools down. That's when we start thinking. Hard to think about hunting sometimes and all the things you got to do. I got to go shoot some blue rock. I got to go trim shooting lanes out of the tree stand when it's 100+ degrees.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Smacks you in the face.
Yeah, it does. I don't think doves like to fly in 100 degrees. I
don't think anything
sitting
likes
on
to
a tree branch just panting away.
Well, you'd have to assume there's a certain point where they just spontaneous combust and just like, Dad, what's that ball of fire going past us? I don't know, we're not going to find out.
I think it's about 110. We're not far.
It's the end of times. All right, folks, we're going to have to put a fork in it at that point. Be sure to give us a subscribe, give us a thumbs up so you know when the next one drops. But until then,
Hunt Nebraska, brought to you by your Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.